Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session. Welcome to the Fragility Forum. As you can see, I'm here. We're only two on stand, but I understand that we have 3 other panelists who are connected online. And so we will get to them in a minute. You can see them, or at least 2 of them, behind you or behind us. This session is titled Engagement During Active Conflicts, Lessons from Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Gaza, Palestine. My name is Olivier Lavinal. I'm the program leader for sustainable development for Afghanistan at the World Bank. And I'm very happy to be here to moderate this session that echoes a lot of what was said yesterday for those of you who were there in the opening sessions. Anna Björde, for example, insisted on the need to remain engaged in conflict. Franck Bousquet, in the follow-up session from the IMF, said this is not only a need, but this means that we'll have to get engaged in protracted situations over a long period of time. You will have heard as well that there was a strong focus put by the panelists yesterday on people and on institutions. So this session takes all of that and brings it in probably a more concrete way, deep dives into some of these lessons that we've learned across these countries, Afghanistan, Ukraine, or Gaza, and we'll ask our panelists to share their insights. Now, it's an ambitious goal in 1 hour to be able to go through these 3 countries, but the good news is that we have an amazing set of participants, of panelists, and so hopefully with them, we'll be able to manage. You'll be able to ask questions at the end. We'll also take online questions. Our chat moderators, as has been the case so far, is here standing on my right. And there we have Rasha Bakir, who just joined us. Let me briefly introduce them and then give them the floor, because after all, we're here to listen to them. On my left is Miss Lainey Thomas. She's the officer in charge of Fragility and Engagement Division at the ADB, Asian Development Bank. Online, we have Barbara Rambusek, Director for Gender and Economic Inclusion from EBRD. And this session is actually co-hosted by ADB and EBRD. We also have online Ms. Rasha Bakir. She is the Partnerships and Fundraising Manager of Palestine Red Crescent Society. Finally, we're pleased, honored to have the ASG, Deputy Executive Director for Humanitarian Action and Supply Operations from UNICEF, Mr. Ted Shaiban. So welcome to all the panelists and welcome to you all again. Maybe just in terms of housekeeping, a last point of detail that the organization asked me to talk about. So virtual participation is, of course, there. You have a translation if and as need be virtually, and we'll get back to your questions in about 45 minutes. So the way this is going to work is that we'll have 2 blocks of questions, right? I will ask one question, the same question, to our 4 panelists, and then we will tailor the question to each one of the organizations. So the first question, and I'll turn, to you, Lainey, since you're here in the room and co-host of this event, is really to take us through that journey and, share with us some of the lessons learned, the what, basically, that you and your organization have witnessed and experienced in Afghanistan. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Olivier. And thanks to everybody who's joining us today. It's great to see so much interest in this topic that's very dear to us and is really something that we spend a lot of time discussing and thinking about at the Asian Development Bank. So to answer the question about what we've learned, let me just quickly go through the first, how we have stayed engaged. And again, this draws so much from what we were talking about yesterday, so many different points that have that are true to our experience in staying engaged in Afghanistan. So I guess the top line answer is that we've stayed engaged through partnerships. That's been our approach. We put all regular assistance on hold from the 15th of August in 2021, and it still is. In January 2022, we approved $405 million support for the Afghan People Project, which has a focus in food security, access to education, and health services and monitoring, and that's being implemented by 4 UN agency partners: FAO, World Food Program, UNDP, and UNICEF. In November 2023, we approved a second project, which is Claims and Expenditures Project. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, that UNOPS is implementing. And throughout that, we have tried to stay engaged in the region. Our staff relocated to Dushanbe in Tajikistan, and we've been engaged regionally with regional partners as well, and are planning to reopen in the next few months. So that's already starting on a small scale now. So that's what we've been doing. So now if I can turn and talk a little bit about the lessons, what have we learned through this? And as a caveat, I'm from the Fragility and Engagement Division of the Asian Development Bank, where I work on FCAS and SIDS, Small Island Developing States, at an institutional level. And so my reflections are from an institutional perspective. I'm not part of the Afghanistan country team, and so I'm not in any way trying to speak on their behalf. But so from where I sit, supporting our work in FCAS and SIDS, my takeaways that we've seen is, I think the first thing is to stay big picture. And I feel like this is kind of a generic lesson, staying big picture. So what does that look like, or what does that mean for us? So trying to dig down a little bit. The first thing is, we finance governments. That's our development model. We provide mostly governments and also private sector money for development projects. So without that government in place, how are we going to operate in Afghanistan? There's huge urgent needs. And so what's worked for us is to really keep a focus on that need and let that drive us. We recognize that the FCAS context of Afghanistan demands really substantive support, and not just single sectors, but a much more comprehensive and meaningful response. Then also, we've been thinking long-term, both backwards and forwards. And, we've had a long relationship supporting the people of Afghanistan, and we're not about ready to change that. And that also drives our consideration and our work, where we intend to provide support over the very long term in Afghanistan. So that perspective has also really helped us stay big picture. And then we're building on the HDP nexus. And this is one other lesson that, or line from yesterday that I really, spoke to me. One of our panelists said, "Let me remind you, we don't move linearly along the HDP nexus." And that has been so true for our experience in Afghanistan. When we're looking big picture at what the needs are, we're not thinking to just move in a straight line. We're recognizing the complexities. It's much more than that. So how does this play out when we stay big picture? So it starts out with a very large assistance package, a very big project that looks at basic human needs and how we can support those. That is over it's not a long-term project, but it's enough to make it's long enough to make an impact on the situation. And then another way that longer term thinking plays out in our portfolio is through this claims and expenditures verification project that I mentioned earlier. It's not the typical kind of project that we would do, but we've engaged with UNOPS, and they're helping us to understand what kind of outstanding claims were still are still pending after we stopped our assistance to Afghanistan. And so because of that, we're thinking about our longer term relationship with Afghanistan and our reputational risk. It's important to us, even though these aren't contracts that we held, these were contracts with the former government of Afghanistan, that the people who've done the work, are deserve payment, and so we're looking to remedy that. So that's a second way that lesson has played out. So my second lesson would be, again, it's a high level, kind of generic, but it really, but I feel like it's been relevant, which is to keep adapting. The situation in Afghanistan obviously is highly dynamic and fluid, and we have to keep adapting. We have to be moving all the time. And when we suspended assistance, we didn't stop engaging with Afghanistan. We didn't just, take leave and ignore the situation. We were working very actively behind the scenes. We were monitoring what was happening. We were trying to stay abreast of the situation so that we could be positioned to respond when we needed to. And then we also, I found institutionally that within ADB that we had to accept that the lack of having a strict policy about having to handle a situation is okay. And coming from an institution like the Asian Development Bank, where we have a lot of guidelines and policies that help us to make sure that we have systematic responses and ensure that we're comprehensive in our work. Sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable to be in a place where we don't have specific guidance. But the Afghanistan experience for us has been able to help us to work out how are we able to operate? What are the rules that we need to make and adjust as necessary? So in terms of what our work looked like, as you know, since the takeover of the Taliban, there have been disasters triggered by natural hazards. There's been a huge number of refugee returns. There's been constant de facto government interventions and restrictions placed on agencies working in the country that are applied irregularly across the country and are constantly changing. And there's been access issues. So this adaptation, this approach of constant adaptation has really played out in enabling us to work in that kind of fluid situation. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Lainey. Stay big picture, keep adapting, adjusting. You mentioned also the HDP nexus, and it was indeed Abdallah Dardari, I believe, from UNDP yesterday, who was making the point about being sequential and linear. I think that's a really important point. It also speaks to the need to engage as we implement with UN agencies. And since you mentioned UNOPS, I should say that our good friend Nick George is in the room, the country director for UNOPS in Afghanistan. Maybe he'll want to ask you a follow-up question. I'll have one as well. But let me first turn to Barbara. Barbara, welcome to the panel, if you will, even virtually. Maybe over to you to share your lessons on Ukraine and with that special focus on gender. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to join this event today and to be co-hosting as well, even though unfortunately I'm only there virtually, but I still, contribute very much. And I hope that we will have a good conversation in this context. So in relation to Ukraine, as you know, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started pretty much exactly 2 years ago now. And for EBRD, this very much lies at the heart of our mandate, at the heart of who we are, and in a way also why we were set up as an institution. So our resolve and commitment to support Ukraine throughout this war and afterwards has been very strong from the onset. And since February 2022, we have actually invested 4 billion euros into Ukraine directly. And I have to say, particularly during the first year of the conflict, this was not a given, and this was actually very hard, particularly in relation to risk assessments. To invest as a lender into an ongoing war zone is not an easy proposition, and is something that really required a lot of ingenuity and a lot of vision, I think, also on the part of various different departments within EBRD, not least the Treasury, but also our shareholders, our donors, and our partners. So this was a very difficult balancing act, but I think we made it. And even though initially the reliance that we had on donor funds, both to secure the risk, but to also make certain investments happen on the ground with our partners in Ukraine, was very high. We have since received a capital increase, and that's the first for EBRD in decades, specifically focused on Ukraine and on the ongoing need in a way to upscale our activities there. So that really is important, and I think is in a way also an important lesson learned. But what are we actually doing? So we used our financing for a range of different areas. It was really emergency liquidity, but also priority capex. For the private sector, energy security is also remains a key topic, of course. Transport, logistics, essential municipal services, food security, trade facilitation, and then also very important financial intermediation, support to partner financial institutions, and through them to SMEs. So we really tried to target the real economy, but also vital services that were and continue to be really of critical importance. Throughout all these investments, we made sure that there is a strong focus on people. So in a way, our financing had to go beyond liquidity, beyond capital finance, but we had to also focus on the people, on the human capital resilience aspect of our investments and the need that we saw on the ground. So this is really very much about preserving livelihoods and jobs, and the ability for people to continue to be economically active, because that really is vital to the war effort now, but also, of course, going forward to any recovery. So all of our investments under what we call the resilience and livelihoods framework for Ukraine have this specific human capital resilience aspect. Now, what do we mean by human capital resilience in this context? So there are 4 key areas we focus on. One is protecting lives and jobs and people. So this is about supporting our clients to not cut jobs, to maintain employment, and to enable people to have the right skills and be deployed in the best possible way across their operations. The second one is to close any skills gaps that may arise due to people leaving. We know that there are millions of refugees or people being drafted into the armed forces, or people not being able to continue in their employment for other reasons. So closing skills gaps is an important measure. A third one is SMEs, a strong focus on SMEs, both in terms of continuing lending support, but also advisory services to help them adjust to the new challenges that in relation to their supply chains, their customer base, their operations on the ground. Many SMEs had to move their operations either within Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. So we provided a lot of support in this context, specifically also to women entrepreneurs. So again, the third area, SME support, is very important. And then the fourth is vital infrastructure. So this is about access to energy, to food security, ICT connectivity, all these areas that in a way are enablers for human capital and human capital resilience. So what have we learned? And I think we will see some parallels to the Asian Development Bank that we have just heard. One is that this focus on human capital resilience is absolutely essential as part of investments, particularly during but also after conflict. So investments by MDBs, by us, by investors have to go beyond the bricks and mortar, beyond the cash flow and liquidity. They have to focus on people. And because businesses can't operate without people, the country really requires its human capital in order to function. So if we look at, for example, Ukraine, the workforce in Ukraine has decreased by 40% as a result of the war. There was roughly 17.4 million before the war, and it shrank to 12.5 million. So that is a huge loss of human capital, and you can imagine the consequences that this has for companies in order to be able to operate. Almost 1.5 million people were mobilized into the armed forces. There are, I think at the moment, 900,000 veterans that are trying to come back into the labor market. Again, huge challenges due to the sort of psychosocial, but also physical scars that they bring with them. Unemployment is very high in Ukraine. It's increased by about 20%. But interestingly, at the same time, there are huge numbers of vacancies that companies can't fill because the matching doesn't quite work. The people don't quite have the right skills in the types of jobs, which are now changing also due to the differences in requirements in the wartime economy that exists. So there's this mismatch between unemployment and vacancies. And we also see that a lot more women need to step into what used to be male-dominated sectors, a classic sort of wartime economy characteristic. Because a lot of the men have either been drafted into the armed forces or have left the country or are otherwise not available at this point. So what that leads to is high staff attrition, reduced working capacity, skills shortages, and a loss also of vital infrastructure. So building a focus on these elements into how we invest is something that we really put at the forefront, and is something that we have also learned from previous crisis responses where maybe we didn't have this focus as much as we do now, and we certainly see the difference in terms of impact. So that's the first lesson. The second one is similar to what we've heard, but maybe in a slightly different context, is we need to be adaptable. We need to change the type of support that we provide from sort of pre-war support, also in relation to human capital, to new areas of work that we may have never thought of, but that are now needed and also possible. So let me give you some examples of what that means. So if we focus on the reintegration of veterans, for example, into the workforce, I just told you there are about just under 1 million veterans. Going forward, it is expected that veterans will make up to 10% of the workforce in Ukraine. So this is a huge problem. What we can do and what we are doing is by investing into our corporate and also SOE clients, we support them with technical assistance that is directly linked to our investments, but that helps them to identify how they can make workforce and workplace adjustments for those veterans, the training of managers to deal with the specific requirements and needs that veterans may have, psychological support, both to the veterans, co-workers, managers, but also the families of veterans, because that is really, it's that enabling and supportive environment that needs to be created. A focus on skills, upskilling, reskilling. Veterans may not be able to be deployed in the jobs they had before. They may need upskilling, reskilling in order to be redeployed elsewhere. There is a question about compensation and benefits in the system within companies, but also succession planning, of course. So we have been developing and implementing these programs with large corporate clients, but also SOEs such as Ukrenergo, Naftogaz, other clients in the agribusiness sector, pharmaceutical sectors, and so forth. So it's something that is really essential and that we link directly to our investments. A second area is then access to finance and entrepreneurship. We know that according to studies, over 60% of veterans would actually like to engage in entrepreneurship in the future, but also 26% would know about how to raise investment and have the capacity to sort of set up and develop business plans. So there's a big need both for finance, but also for other support. So what we have done, very much I have to say for the first time, this is not something we've done before, but we are engaging with partner financial institutions, but also with the central bank to build a focus on capacity building to SMEs into our lending products for SMEs to reintegrate veterans into their workforce and to develop their capacity to be able to handle all these challenges that come from that, but also for partner financial institutions to extend finance to veteran entrepreneurs and to support them and to provide the advisory support to help them to set up and to grow their businesses. So that for us is a totally new approach, in a way an adaptation of what we've done in the past on women in business, youth in business, etc., credit lines, but with a very different target group in mind. And then the third is really about access to vital infrastructure. And here is very much about the integration of, for example, universal accessibility standards into our infrastructure investments in order to make sure that they are really usable and accessible for everybody, and that this focus on building back better is actually a reality. So maybe I'll leave it at that, but I hope these were helpful examples.
No, thank you very much, Barbara. And you actually already went into the second part of the discussion, which is on the how. So that was helpful. I mean, the real focus that you put on, you know, the delivery of vital services and vital infrastructure, and the focus on people is something that was really highlighted yesterday as well, including by the Prime Minister of Chad, on the skills and its importance. In the interest of time, we'll turn and talking about resilience to our third panelist from Gaza. Can you hear us, Rasha? And
yes.
Can you share your learning? I mean, I should preface this by acknowledging the great human suffering and probably extending the room's sympathy to you, Rasha. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the sympathy, and also for this chance actually to speak at this important forum. Lessons learned, we've been, I believe, learning lessons for many years, and I think we're still learning. Even every day we're finding something new. But by this crisis, a main lesson was actually to know how privileged we are to be a local organization who has been on the front lines since even before this war started. This meant that we have a strong trust and image in the communities that have allowed us actually to address the needs and to be adaptive to everything that is taking place, and learn that preparedness is not only by words. The investments done in Palestine probably over the years in the names of contingency planning, preparedness, all of these projects and programs that have been taking place, in fact, have almost fell down and failed probably in response to such a magnitude of a crisis that is taking place. However, it became clear that for a national society on the ground, you do not stick to paper as much as learn and be very sensitive to every development in every minute. And this has meant that you need to stay even at the time when everyone has left. By rules, by regulations, probably for security, you would expect that international agencies, some of the communities would leave, just as what happened here in Gaza from the north of Gaza Strip towards the south after the evacuations order took place. However, at the moment, we have more than 300 to 400,000 people staying in the north, and they don't have real services from health to relief to everything else. What PRCS has done was actually to move and to adapt quickly by introducing the different other mechanisms, such as, for example, with the collapse of the health system, hospitals getting out of service, to go for advanced medical posts. In these advanced medical posts, they are run by staff and volunteers who decided to stay as long as people stay. And this is the real manifestation of we do not leave people behind, leave no one behind. And by this, they have risked their lives, and they still do actually, but they have managed also to bring life to this world. They are delivering babies in the hardest conditions. So this has been a very important lesson I see, not only for Palestine, but probably for other contexts. And of course, another lesson was the faster that you adapt, the better, and the more benefit it is for people. This has meant that you always see what needs are and where they are, and you have to run around that in a way that would ensure you are really responding to the needs, and that you're not just getting the trends according to what probably internationally would be accepted as much as what people really want and need, and how you can save lives. Above of this, we cannot be alone, of course. So it is the complementarity between the different components, organizations, agencies, everyone who are working in this field is very important. No one can replace the other. And everyone should really work together in order to fill in the gaps, especially when you talk about a context where you do not almost have any local authorities. But this has also meant that we need to build on all the capacities, all the possibilities that are there on the ground, and not to limit ourselves to what we think would work. You should really sense where the needs, where the gaps are, where the strengths are for everyone, and try to complement each other. For example, we have been now working on medical evacuations. For a national society, honestly, we have been subject to different attacks or different targeting by either killing or arrests of our teams. We have known that if we have escort by an international agency, probably we are safer. And that was something important in our context that has been taking place. So it was important to build on the strengths of others as well. In our case, again, we have advanced medical posts, but we are in need of main equipment, solar panels, and other things that would be important to run such medical posts. We are unable to get these in, but probably with other partners, they can have their leverage actually and the acceptance that would allow them to have entry of these goods and these supplies into the Gaza Strip. So it is important to also look how we can complement each other and to ensure always that nobody can substitute the other. The load is already too big in order for one or more actually to take. The challenges actually are on the ground are beyond expectations. I think a main failure for the international community was in the case of Gaza was what we have learned by the experience of other contexts, whether in war or natural disasters, we could not unfortunately employ in the Gaza situation. We are talking about more than 70% of housing and residential buildings being completely lost. And the high number of displacement of all the Palestinian communities now are left to stay in tents. For example, what we have learned last year of and developed of experience with prefab shelter, we are unable to get these prefab shelter into Gaza. They are prevented entry to the Gaza Strip. And then it becomes the question of how is the complementarity with member states, with the other partners should take place. It's not only about humanitarians to take a lead role in the response operations. And in this, the political leverage that everyone can play is very important to enable adequate, efficient, and effective response. Because at the time being, we're bringing tents, we're spending so much money, everyone, donors, member states, everyone on tents, but we know that this cannot be even a short-term intervention. It's not even a long-term intervention. So are we really looking into the what's coming ahead, or are we just trying to solve the problem at the moment right now? I think it was really important to look into the strength of the communities and the strength of the resilience of the teams who have been doing the services while they are themselves impacted and affected. They have lost their homes, they have lost part of their families, some of them they've lost already their lives. So far, we have lost 21 of our colleagues, 15 on them on the line on duty with direct targeting, and this cannot be acceptable. All of them are displaced, either in tents or have rented new apartments if there are any left. And this means that their capacity with the trauma that they are dealing with, their capacity to respond is not really at its best. But they continue to do this because there is no other choice, especially at a time where I cannot surge deployments from the West Bank, for example, towards Gaza, which is important in terms of my contingency planning. We continue to run health and social services in terms of medical evacuations, in terms of ambulance system, hospitals, advanced medical posts, public health, as well as relief of food and non-food items distribution. And a new role that was given to PRCS, for example, was the logistics role of receipt of all aid entering Gaza Strip. Not only this aid that's coming to Palestine Red Crescent, but also for any international or national organization. This has been given by the local authorities in Palestine and in Egypt, and this has meant the upscale of the organization in terms of logistics is really important, and how we can also work hand in hand with UNRWA and with the different other agencies, logistics cluster, everyone, to ensure the right way is really the right work we are really doing. And one last point, I would really mention the importance of the lessons that we can take from people, where they do not really give up. You have seen, I think all of you who have been following up on the situation, the different and recurrent blackouts of telecommunication in Gaza Strip, which means that no phones, no telephones, no mobile phones, no internet has been possible actually to take place there. Aside from the fact that we at the headquarters in Ramallah are unable to learn what is the situation is, how it's developing, what their needs are, if they are safe or not, our teams on the ground, it was also for us shocking to expect that people under a crisis like this cannot even call for an ambulance. But the teams in Gaza have found their way. In 2023, in 2024, they are going back probably to the very 2,000 years back. They have stationed ambulances at hospitals and have been dispatched to locations according to where they can see smoke coming up, or to where they learn the first injury that is reaching the ambulance by a private car. And then they would go there and try to help. So accordingly, what we understand is, for a local national society, it is important to be empowered and to build on this trust and acceptance of communities to what it has, but it really needs continuous protection and respect to the international law and the conventions that are held worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasha. Thank you for the lessons shared, and also the lesson you offer to us all by doing this important work you're doing in Gaza. You said adjust, and you added swiftly. I think, you know, to Lanie's and Barbara's point, I think that's important. Also innovating, it seems to me, including under fire. So these are items that the room and the panelists may want to refer back to. Thank you to you again. Ted, can we turn to you? I know you're in Addis, and it's probably late, so thanks to you for joining. Thanks for the pleasure and the honor of having you. You have a tough job. It's to reflect not only on Afghanistan, on Ukraine, or on Gaza, Palestine, but also share the lessons. I'm not sure you will want to share the lessons in all of these three settings, but if you could share your main thoughts, that would be great. Over to you, Ted.
Thank you, Olivier, and thanks to the great panelists, but also to the audience today. I'll actually try to do a bit of a sampling from the three settings. And let me start by saying that I think the most important point is to start by staying and delivering, both our national and our international staff, and to really focus on relying on local capacities and systems, and to work with those. UNICEF is there before, during, and after crises, and I think it's those relationships that allow us to continue to contribute and to sustain responses in these different contexts. Yeah, I want to start where Rasha left off and speak about Gaza. I mean, in some ways, the lessons from Gaza are the lessons about what is absolutely necessary to be able to work, and the fact that we don't have that in the case of Gaza. I mean, 30,000 people dead, 70% of whom are women and children. 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 who are acutely malnourished, with terrible hunger in the north of the Strip, because simply we don't have the minimum standards when it comes to humanitarian access, when it comes to humanitarian principles, anything from deconfliction to access point to sufficient logistics means. And Gaza has been, in some ways, an example of where the system strains at its most. Nonetheless, there's been an operation that has tried to make a difference, and I think what's been essential has been innovation. Sourcing locally desal plants that can each serve between 20 and 30,000 people. So taking brackish or salt water and turning it into potable water. Using rubble from all this bombing and destruction to construct latrines. And even in a context like Gaza, using cash as a commodity, electronic cash, to the extent that there's still markets that function for certain goods. There are vegetables that are grown, being able to channel that to the most vulnerable, children with disabilities, families that have lost their caregivers, etc. Turning to Afghanistan, and I want to, again, build on what of the colleagues have said. I think for me, the most important lesson from Afghanistan has been to see how to sustain national systems at the subnational level. And we've got a number of partners involved, but I want to do a shout out here to both the ADB and the World Bank in the way we've come together to support both the health and the education system, including paying frontline health workers and paying teachers. And for me, this is the lesson that cuts across Afghanistan, Yemen, South Sudan, Sudan, where repurposing the existing system in a manner that doesn't buy into a political dynamic, but recognizes that frontline workers are key, has managed the response at country level to reach results at scale. And just to give an example, when it comes to education, the community-based education initiative that UNICEF has been engaged in has reached 686,000 children with education, half of whom are girls. And the reach for several of the health activities are national in scope. So again, I think even in the most difficult circumstances, identifying those systems that can be sustained and finding ways to do so is key. And then finally, turning to Ukraine, I think they're 2 years into the conflict. I think what's important is to acknowledge that we need to work on different levels. Firstly, support the frontline communities. The active conflict there is still devastating. But in parallel, there's also a whole recovery and reconstruction efforts. And for us in UNICEF, we're focusing on medium-sized water systems, reaching communities between 20 and 40,000 people and building that. And then the third level is really working on systems and trying to address in some ways some of the inequities and some of the vulnerabilities that were there before the conflict. So for example, Ukraine had a very strong propensity to rely on institutionalization to deal with children with vulnerabilities, disabled. And this is something that frankly has resulted in a very difficult dynamic during the conflict. So, very strong work with the relevant ministries in Ukraine to focus on what's called better care, moving away from institutionalization towards an approach to vulnerability that is community and family-based, fostered children that are supported at household level, and in the process looking at EU accession standards and how those can be met. This was presented at the London conference last year. We're looking at something similar around education for Berlin this coming year. So again, working on different levels concurrently, and frankly, not forgetting the crisis. 2 years in, people tend to move on, and we need to remember that the crisis is not over in Ukraine. Thank you, Olivier.
No, thank you, Ted. Thank you very much for a brilliant intervention. I mean, working on systems requires the collective effort, right? The one that you called for across all stakeholders, be it national, local stakeholders, but also our partnership, something that actually all the panelists have insisted on. We're running out of time now, of course, but we did say in the beginning that it was a tall order to handle 3 countries and have a broad view on this. The second, round or sequence, I'll probably ask the panelists to be short and crisp, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. We wanted to talk a bit about the delivery model. The panelists have done it to a large extent in the first round, I feel. But if you want to reflect either on what has been said and resonates to you, and maybe even share some of your challenges and how you overcame these challenges. I know that's a lot of questions in 1 or 2 minutes, but maybe focus on one of these. That would be great. And then we'll turn to the room and questions. Over to you.
Okay. Well, I just want to basically steal everything that Rasha said. I really, I thought you were very articulate when you were talking about how local organizations have so much to offer. And I think that's one of the things Asian Development Bank is a different, it's not a humanitarian organization. And so when we looked at a partner, that was one of the biggest successes. And you really articulated well what a local partner brings, that local knowledge, that the adaptation quickly, that really different scale of being able to respond, adjust, innovate. And I think digital technology, like for example, Earth observation has also been something that we've worked with UNOPS in terms of how we can use that to bring another dimension to validate work when we're working in these really difficult situations. So for me, I would say that the partnership, which has been our main response, has really been amplified. One of the real successes has been the value that local presence brings. Is that short enough?
That is perfect. Thank you very much. Partnering for impact. Barbara, that's your call probably to reflect on your experience as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be very quick as well. So partnerships clearly are very important, and I'm not going to go into the detail. I think that has been established, and we can only all deliver in partnership because we bring different expertise and different capacities and mandates to the party overall. The second point I wanted to make is a focus on policy and sort of the broader environment. So in the Ukraine, for example, we look at we are working with the Ministry for Education to undertake skills mapping and to shape skills standards in key sectors that are now needed more than they were before the war in order to make that contribution towards that war economy and human capital. But there are many other examples. But I think this broader enabling the environment and skill and policy engagement in this context is important. And then the third point I wanted to make was specifically in relation to gender, because I don't think that's something we've heard so much before. So really to make sure that investments and policy action, partnership action, integrates gender into how we respond in a crisis, because we know women are disproportionately affected. We know that the rates of gender-based violence and harassment are going up. And we need to integrate this focus into how we work with all of our clients, how we work with our policy partners. So in Ukraine also we are establishing sort of a set of guiding standards for investors, for MDBs in partnership with our local stakeholders. But this focus on gender-based violence, care economy in this context is very important. So I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Focus on people, but most notably on the most vulnerable people is really critical. Rasha, over to you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just also try to be very, very short. Well, I like to see partnerships actually on different levels. It's not one type of partnership. It is the level for local organizations. It is the level with donors and member states, where they have also responsibilities in line with their mandate. It's partnering with the local communities, because they are the ones that we are embedded in, that they are the one that we are serving. And here comes also what we call here in the Red Cross Red Crescent as CEA, community engagement and accountability, that you are working with communities, you are not working for them. And by this, you ensure the ownership and the long-term actually impact that is staying in communities even after you leave, and which would allow you to continue the development in the organizations, as well as the level with partners who are your direct partners, who are trying to enable you to become stronger and to really attain the grand bargain and localization agendas. When you talk about empowering in a real manner of empowering, rather than taking over or taking the burden from you, but actually pushing you to be really on the core and the lead in every operation. And by this, just referring to this, I'd like to see that the best manifestation of the triple nexus was actually taking place in here. To give you a very quick example, all the time that we've been before this crisis working on capacity building, training, on first aid, on equipment, etc., within communities, that was all the time probably criticized by some of the donors actually, that this is more development, not humanitarian, because you're not responding to emergency now. But during emergencies, you will not be able to respond if you're not prepared from before, and if you have not invested in this before. And this was the main challenge for us. That was clearly seen when this crisis took place, that you already have the capacities on the ground, the wide reach, and you are able to implement accordingly. The second part of it was actually in the triple nexus, not only humanitarian development, but the peace part, which I'd like to see as the role of member states to enable me to continue. At the moment, I am unable to deliver efficient and effective response in Gaza because the situation is actually political. It's not about the capacity of the humanitarian organization. It is not enough for humanitarians to just get pledges of funding. I have millions now ready to be spent, but I do not have the space nor the capacity to spend them because I cannot enter my aid, my prefab shelter, latrines, mobile clinics, whatsoever that I am in need to into Gaza. And this means that my response will continue to be very minimal. And I am put also a very important point that people and the world is not noticing. The humanitarian organizations are put in the corner because people do not understand what it means that I am unable to help them. They expect that I would be able to respond to their basic needs. They do not understand that I have these challenges of entry of items, entry of goods, safe access, whether it's to the north now, where people are really suffering from famine. They don't eat at all, actually. They're running and begging for flour. We are unable to get flour in, although it's maybe on tens of trucks outside the borders. So all the answers to the questions on the ground are actually in the hands of also the political side, which means that without the complementarity between the different partners here in this cycle, between the local organization, the local communities, donors and member states, as well as partners, we will not be able to achieve what we are in need of. This is very important, and the respect to international law, to IHL, the exhaustion of people, the need for real solutions on the ground, such as what everyone is calling for a ceasefire, for improved access, for safe and secured access. It's all in line with international law and the international conventions. It's nothing new, actually. So this is our call as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your call, Rasha. Sustaining our engagement. Thank you. Sustaining our engagement by ensuring local ownership. Ted, you had mentioned and highlighted the importance of sustained engagement. Rasha added a dimension to it that you also referenced, which is the importance of local ownership if we want to work in the long term, right? Ted, I'll turn to you. You lead operations for UNICEF. Could you also reflect on the operational challenges that you have to do so? Over to you, Ted.
Sure. Olivier, let me finish with 3 quick points. Number one, I think there's tremendous resilience at community level. And some people don't like the word resilience, but I think it actually means a lot. And I think the question is, how does one build on that resilience, including, by the way, the private sector? I mean, part of the solution in Gaza is not to rely purely on humanitarians, but to actually resume commercial traffic. And then cash and other strategies can be used in the Strip. And these are political choices when these things don't happen. I can also point in this regard to, WFP, UNFPA, and UNICEF working with community leaders, neighborhood by neighborhood in the Gaza Strip to try to deliver an integrated package of services and indeed build on that community resilience. So that would be the first point. Second, I want to double down on this issue of systems. In every context, there are systems that can be supported, even when there's issues with governance, where there's issues with the legitimacy of governance, and where there's issues with corruption. And I think at sub-national levels in particular, we really need to strengthen those systems and focus on using those systems to reach scale. And then lastly, a point that we haven't discussed here, but I think it's the point about not looking at actions sequentially, but rather concurrently, and being willing to, in some ways, take more risk with resources. So, you want redundancy in the strategies that you're using, and that may look like you may be at risk of wasting resources, but because the systems and the vulnerability is so high, you really want to be able to work on several strategies at the same time. And I think all of us need to re-examine our appetite for risk and the speed at which we're able to make decisions in these contexts. I think we need a higher risk appetite and a higher speed in decision making to be able to continue to support the population in these contexts. Thank you, Olivier.
No, thank you for making also that last point that indeed was not present in the discussion, but that is absolutely critical, and that relates to some extent to what you said, Lady, about the HDP nexus and the need to hit all the letters, if you will, at the same time. I think this is critical. So now, at last, we come to you. Before coming to you, I was told that I need to ask questions coming in from the chat. So privilege to Catherine probably to ask 1 or 2 questions from the chat. I'm sure there were many. And then we'll probably, before the panel answers, take questions from the room so we can actually have a conversation a bit. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Olivier. So we did have a couple of excellent questions. So I will give 2. One for Elaine. You mentioned ADB has to depart from its financing model and rely on UN agencies. Does ADB have existing policies and frameworks that enable this shift? And do you have plans to diversify beyond UN agencies? So for example, CSOs, NGOs, and not just for Afghanistan, but also for other contexts. And then there was one question for Barbara, because you mentioned, support to veterans to establish businesses. There are many agencies that actually do this. So how can we better coordinate to be more effective?
Thank you. So the questions are pointed at our panelists. Let me see though if we have 2 handers in the room. Yes, please, and let's take a few questions. Go ahead. I mean, I think, is there a mic moving around? Yeah. I see 3 or 4 hands up. We'll take them 2 by 2, maybe just 2 for now, so we can get our panelists to answer the first 4 questions, and then 2 later. If you can introduce yourselves.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, panelists. It's been a pleasure hearing all of you speak. My name is Stephen. I'm an intern at the United Nations Populations Fund, UNFPA, and my question is addressed towards the panelists as a whole. I want to ask a little bit about the last miles, especially from the perspective of the UN system. How can we strengthen interagency collaboration, especially regarding last mile humanitarian assistance? Because whether or not we like it or not, the reality is in today's fragile context, the demand for humanitarian action is becoming more and more severe, especially in Gaza. So how can we increase that interagency collaboration on the last mile delivery? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Excellent question. Let's take another one, and then we'll turn to the panelists.
Hi, guys. My name is Leon. I'm with the World Bank with DEC. My questions are on data and data sharing. So in lieu of markets that are functioning independently, I guess, without outside liquidity, how do we best optimize those markets, be it in Ukraine, for example, with the labor market, where you have a misallocation between opportunities and between people that want to work, and also in Gaza, where you have opportunities, where you have markets that are around vegetation that are being grown, but at the same time, access to those goods is challenging for a lot of different people. Being able to optimize those markets, what kind of data would you need, and what kind of systems would we need to develop in place to be able to share the kinds of data needed to optimize them and sustain them? Thank you.
Let me turn to the panelists. Maybe turn to you, Lainey, first, if you want to answer the first question and reflect on the other 2.
Okay, thank you. So the question was about, as ADB deviates when it works with UN agencies in Afghanistan, has it had to create a new framework to enable this shift? So no, it hasn't had to do that. The ADB has been working with UN agencies in a range of different countries where there are not humanitarian emergencies. And so we didn't. However, every situation is different. And so we've had to tailor the relationship, but we have the framework already in place. Our procurement policy was updated a few years ago. It's principles based, and it supports the engagement of other entities to deliver services in a much more flexible way. And then it says that will ADB be looking at CSOs, NGOs, and other stakeholders to do its work in Afghanistan and others? And in fact, yes, right now those UN agencies with whom we're working do themselves work with civil society organizations, and we're looking at other possible opportunities for investment in Afghanistan, and all stakeholders are being considered for that, and in other areas around ADB. In fact, there's a lot of work going on in promoting civil society engagement in our work at all different stages of the project cycle. Our civil society strategic approach paper is nearing approval, and so that'll be available shortly, which details what this will look like. And then on, I guess I could talk about Steve's question about the last mile. And I think it's been really interesting for me to see how we're increasing this collaboration and working better together. And some of the points that I talked about before about keeping the eye on the end goal, that really helps when we're trying to, when we have different types of organizations working together, is really thinking about how we're going to get the services to the most vulnerable people on the ground in the quickest way. And by doing that, that helps us to figure out where we each have different skill sets. And again, back to what my colleagues have said, that bringing together different skills and recognizing what we each bring together has been a success factor that I've observed in the past. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Barbara, there was a specific question for you, EBRD, but you may also want to reflect on the data question, because I'm sure that EBRD is doing a lot on that as well. Over to you.
So maybe very briefly on the question about coordination in relation to veterans and business support, entrepreneurship. Absolutely. This is very much at the heart of what we do. So we don't set out to do this in isolation. We work with our partner financial institutions, the National Bank, Corn Ferry, CSOs, and many others, because clearly we're not the only ones doing this, but we can provide a certain contribution, which is basically mobilizing financial institutions to make their make a contribution and be part of the solution. The focus on data, I think, is very important. So here we have this mismatch. We have lots of vacancies. We have high unemployment. There's clearly a matching gap. And what we are doing is we're working together with the Ministry for Finance, with the Ministry for Education, in order to assess the way in which the National Employment Service can be enhanced. So it's really that catalytic function, that in-between role that is so important in this context. And we are coming to that from the private sector point of view. What do our clients need? What kind of data, what kind of information would you need in order to be able to recruit somebody? How can they put their vacancies out into the market in the most effective way? And so we're partnering again with a broad range of partners, including the European Training Foundation, the ILO, IOM, various other UN agencies. OECD is also part of this, in order to see what we can jointly do to support Ukraine to reshape this very vital service as part of a more sort of systemic approach to how we can help. So the focus on data, the focus on systems in this context is very important. So point well made, and something that we very much look at.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Rasha and Ted, do you want to react to the questions that were raised? I mean, there's the last mile question, of course, that you're very knowledgeable on. Rasha, can I turn to you maybe first?
Yes, sure. Well, it was a very interesting point, because we're looking into the first mile before the last mile, to be honest. In our context, we have been struggling to get aid in before getting it into people. And just to clarify, my point is what we have been mentioning and talking about since and advocating for since the beginning, when people are asking, okay, what are your priority needs, especially for those doing in-kind donations? It's like everything is needed now. Whether you talk about medical supplies or food or water or whatsoever you think about ever in your mind, everything is needed. When the pipeline is so limited, when you talk about an average of 100 trucks in the best of times getting into the Gaza Strip, which used to get no less than 500 trucks before the war, before that people were all in need, before the full population was actually in need, then you are barely responding to the bare minimum of any of these needs. And in order for us to continue serving and to reach the last mile, actually, that's why we say we need the first mile even to get in. And then you think about the absence of law and order that has been happening in the Gaza Strip, which has meant that even delivery of services has been very challenging. We are no longer able to move trucks of aid, for example, from the crossing towards the people without getting them, getting people trying to get whatever they can. We do not call it looting. We cannot call it attacking as much as actually people trying to survive. Because this has not happened in the first 2.5 months of the war. It started to happen mid-December onward. And now it's impossible for any truck of aid to move without having all of these challenges. It has become more challenging for us to reach any place or any point. It has become more challenging to say, do I need water or do I need food? It has been more challenging to think that I can only depend on ready-to-eat food for 4.5 months now, for a population that is really suffering from famine and malnutrition, because I am unable to get them the proper food into Gaza because there is no gas, no water, no clean water. Then what else? So I think we have a lot of slogans that we are talking about in the humanitarian sector and probably requirements by donors that are actually impossible to implement and ensure having on the ground with a situation without proper address of everything around.
Thank you, Rasha, for the reality check and quite a powerful statement again. Ted, can I turn to you for your own reflections?
Yeah, let me just add to the whole question on last mile, and I would make 2 points. Firstly is the importance of localization and working with local or institutions. I think the different international organizations have expertise and skills that can complement each other in working with the same local organization and structures and systems. I think that's important. And second, there's many different coordination models. There's the refugee coordination model, the public health emergency coordination model. There's what we do in development settings. The humanitarian coordination model, for all its flaws, is possibly the most established and the strongest. And what we've seen is where we rely on clusters to coordinate and work with each other and share information, set priorities, and try to avoid duplication of work, we can do the best job possible with the last mile delivery. And I have to say, and I'm just going to use the Gaza example, it took a long time to get organized in Gaza. And in addition to all the constraints that both Rasha and I and others have spoke to, we should have looked at perhaps doing certain things faster. But we now all get together in different sectors and do coordinate, whether it's Palestinian Red Cross Society, UNFPA, UNICEF, all of the different actors. And it helps. It helps try to do the best under impossible circumstances.
Thank you very much. I mean, clearly the message is we cannot act alone is one recurrent message across the Fragility Forum. I know we're running over time, but let me maybe turn to the room one last time to see if there are any burning questions. I'm sure there are many. Let's take 2, please. Over in the back, and then the gentleman.
Oh, okay. My name is Homa Soruri, and I work with Integrity Global. My question is more relevant for UNICEF, also for ADB, because they have ongoing operation in Afghanistan. If you could briefly share some lessons learned on how you navigate challenges posed by authorities. In this case, I mean, when Taliban, they are trying to affect project objectives or influence your operation in any way, what are some, some lessons learned that you could share with us? Thank you.
Thank you. Second question.
Hi, my name is Paul Harvey with Humanitarian Outcomes. Ted, you mentioned the importance of humanitarian cash payments in the response in Gaza. And I think it's extraordinary that 160,000 households have been reached with humanitarian cash payments. It's a tribute to the sort of resilience of the payment system and also the importance of sort of existing investments in systems and the social protection system. I wonder if you had any, you or Rasha, any reflections on the role of cash in the overall humanitarian response in the light of the huge constraints we've heard about, but also how to enable that cash payments to continue given the risk of sort of breakdown of public order and the risk that cash could fuel that breakdown.
Great. I think we'll leave it there. Let me turn first to Ted this time. And Ted, if you wish to answer the two questions that were raised, and maybe also conclude, because we do have to wrap up, and then I'll turn to Barbara, Rasha, Lainey, just for short conclusions. Over to you, Ted.
No, thank you for those questions. Let me start with the situation in Afghanistan. And I think it's safe to say that it's one of the most challenging environment where the operating space for humanitarian actors has shrunk, and nothing more difficult than the decisions by the de facto authorities on girls and women and the work of female aid workers, but also bureaucratic impediments and threats against humanitarian personnel. And I think what we've done is continued our advocacy on the importance of human rights and humanitarian principles, but also on negotiating exemptions and workarounds at subnational level. And you have to keep your principle, but also try to find ways to apply those workarounds. And again, try as much as possible to do things locally. I mean, what's possible, what may not be possible in Kandahar may be possible in other parts of the country. And again, we just have to chip away at it in that way, and to continue to work on these issues. So an extremely challenging environment, but I think an environment where every small victory makes a difference. And I think the edge of this issue right now for us is secondary education for girls, and really focusing on that. And this is something we're working closely with partners like Qatar to try to find solutions and ways forward, and using the leverage of partners that do have sway with the de facto authorities like Qatar and Iran and others to try to see what can be done. Second, on the question about cash transfers, I think I would say 2 points there. One, in the Gaza context, it really underlines the importance of commercial traffic and getting commercial goods on the market. And a lot of the cash was at its most useful earlier on, where there are more supplies available. As Russia said, as things have become much more tense and difficult, looting. Sorry, not the word looting. We don't use the word looting, but people trying to do their best to survive has been much more difficult. The attacks on local police also have been a contributing factor to the breakdown of law and order. But cash is still a remarkable strategy. And when I was in Gaza 5 weeks ago, I spent 3 days there. I would speak to people, I would speak to our own staff. And in the morning, you send your family to 2 points. Whatever bread or wheat line is available, to try to get whatever bread or wheat you can get. You send one of your children there, and you send your other child to the bank, the one place where you can get cash. And they wait the whole day to try to get resources and try to access whatever goods are commercially available locally. So I do think it's part of the solution, but it requires commercial traffic at a much bigger scale. And that's one of the many asks that has been made to the political side and to Israel in particular, along with some of the fundamental issues related to international humanitarian law, humanitarian principle, and of course, a ceasefire. Thank you.
No, thanks to you, Ted, and thanks again for joining from Addis. This was the most inspiring session. I suggest that we close here because people in the room are leaving, and we do need to recognize our panelists, if that's okay with you all. Thanks also to our co-hosts, the EBRD and ADB, for what was a very inspiring session and very inspiring panelists. So I think we owe them a round of applause, if that's okay with you. Much appreciated, and thanks again to our panelists. I was asked to tell you on the housekeeping front that lunch will be served, and I guess you will all run to it right now. There's also the option of having lunch made by the Senegalese chef, and since we're in the bank, you know there's no free lunch, so that one you may want to pay it. But thanks again for your participation, and see you soon at the Fragility Forum.